So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the Wine Events Company's Tuesday Night Wine Chat. And this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Olive of Wine Freedom. Thanks for joining us tonight, Sam.
Good evening. Delighted to be with you. Thanks very much for having us.
You're welcome. So, Sam is the founder of Wine Freedom, a natural wine merchant based in Birmingham, curator of the UK's best wine list at the wonderful Michelin-starred Hampton Manor in Solihull. Woo! And you can tell us about some of the other fantastic venues you look after as well. But as if that wasn't enough, Sam is currently transforming a 2,500 square foot 1930s Digbeth warehouse into a multi-use wine space, wine shop, bar, education, all going on in the coolest spot in Brum. I mean, it's fantastic to have the best looking wine merchant in Britain as well, joining us as well, Sam. You know,
don't make me blush. I'll run off screen in a minute. Very kind, thanks, mate.
So thank you so much for joining us. Now, I love the description for Wine Freedom on your website, but why don't you tell us all about Wine Freedom and what it means?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're a growing brand. We started off with the trade a few years ago, so we've been kind of sort of finding our feet really. But one of the things that's really stuck is the educational bit. I personally love engaging with consumers and kind of seeing that little kind of light bulb moment going off, and getting to know people really, whether that's in the trade or consumers that just want to pick up a few bottles to take home. So the educational bit's a really, really important part of what we do. But it's all about kind of really what we're trying to do with the new space is to create experiences where taste and stories kind of come together, which is probably the simplest way of putting it. And you can put that into a restaurant, you can put that into a wine shop. And it's all about kind of making wine fun and inclusive, because the wine industry is typically quite a stuffy, straight-laced industry, and a lot of consumers find it very, very difficult to kind of understand. So we try and make it inclusive and put it in kind of layman terms to make it more understandable, really. And also we're all about authenticity as far as products go. So I know that consumers are after, if you've got an interest in wine, you want to get a real kind of taste of where the products come from. So the only way that we can do that really through wine is to have a proper kind of authentic product. And that's one of the reasons why I focus on wines that are proper, good quality, real handmade products that haven't been mucked around with. That probably doesn't really sum up what we've got on our landing page on our website, but it gives you slightly kind of broader idea of what we're about: inclusive education and about good quality kind of authentic products. So I hope that kind of sums it up.
And kind of wine with provenance, isn't it? You know where it's coming from, you know how it's made.
Yeah.
Minimal intervention wines.
Yeah, completely. I mean, 99% of the bottles that you'll find on the shelves these days, whether it's in supermarkets or in the multiples, they're engineered products. Not to say that's a bad thing at all, but a lot of these wines have been kind of over-engineered. They might be using fruit and grapes that are, not so great, substandard. And quite often it actually takes a really, really good, adept winemaker to try and tweak up this grape juice, to make it into something that's more palatable for the consumer. And I'm afraid, that's something that just we're not really interested in, really. We're the kind of the antithesis of that. We focus and champion small producers doing everything by hand. And that way, you end up having a real kind of genuine, authentic product that really does taste of where it comes from, using less chemicals, less pesticides, and less kind of manipulation kind of in between. So you really do get something that, gives a real kind of window into that space in time, into the vineyard and into the region. That's what I'm interested in. I think most consumers, when they want to do this kind of a bit of tourism, really. When you open a bottle and you pour out a glass, you want to get a genuine taste of Tuscany or of the Loire. You don't want something that's kind of fabricated. And it's so important, really, for a lot of these winemakers to showcase their great varieties, their region, and they try and do it in the most sort of, you know, true, authentic way possible. So there are lots of them out there, and it's, you know, it's great to be, you know, able to represent as many as we can, really.
Yeah. Now, I've got a question pop up from William. He said, good evening, William. He said, are we talking biodynamic wines? And in many cases we are, aren't we? You know, but
yeah, completely. Yeah, it's a bit of a challenging one, really. A lot of people ask me, what's the difference between natural, organic, and biodynamic? And I know you've got a load of quick.
Yeah, we're going to come on to that specifically.
So,
we're going to do a natural wine or minimal intervention jargon busting session.
Yeah,
I'm going to quick fire at you some different terms, and we're going to demystify some of them.
It's very different depending on where you are. So it's the very sort of different shades of grey, I guess, really. There's not a black and white way of doing it. And biodynamic, or the biodynamic philosophy, is something which has really kind of only been coined for the last sort of 60, 70 years or so. But actually it's based on some very old, ancient farming techniques and philosophies, and they vary depending on which country you're in and where you are in the world. But essentially it's all about, you know, the pursuit of quality and looking after your environment and looking after the soil as well, because what we'll probably bring up this evening in conversation is how important soil and the quality of the earth is, you know, when you're planting your vines, and making sure that that's kind of maintained, because if you don't have good quality earth and soil, you just can't grow anything that's, you know, that's worth consuming, really.
Yeah. Now, of course, if we go back to when we met, it was during my time at Hotel du Vin, and I think you probably recently founded Wine Freedom.
Yes.
We actually worked a bit more closely for a wine dinner last autumn at Hampton Manor.
Yeah, it's good fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great fun. I think I've described it as an honourable draw. Essentially, it was a 4-course dinner.
Yeah.
And we took your wine list from Hampton Manor, or the range of wine that you can supply, and we picked a wine each for each course to go with a Michelin-starred 4-course dinner.
Yeah.
And the people that joined us around the table that night got to vote with every course who did the better match. Was it Sam or Tony? And as I say, an honourable draw, 2 courses each. We should have probably screwed down to the detail, shouldn't we? But we were probably both quite grateful to get away without a loss. So we shared.
Absolutely right. And I think I sort of did a bit of a curveball as well. I introduced the cider into the mix.
Which I was all up for disqualifying you at that point, but
absolutely right. So you probably should have won, really, because I pulled a bit of a dodgy one. It was a nice cider, that's what it was.
It was great. It was a really good fun evening. Really good fun. In fact, the photo promoting this event was from that night, wasn't it?
I noticed that. Yeah.
It as the rebel versus the gentleman, and you were the rebel, obviously, and I was the gentleman. But
well, we need to do it again, and
we definitely will.
Once we've got this new venue up and running, then we've got a nice big space to to do round 2. Yeah,
we'll see if I'm still referred to as a gentleman after your 20 questions in 2 minutes later, when we put you through that as well. Yeah. Now, we chose all Wine Freedom wines on the evening. And with good cause, because you'd literally just won UK Wine List of the Year.
Yeah.
Now, the wines are all natural or minimal intervention wines, but that isn't the only thing that swung the prize in your favour, was it? Talk to us a bit about the ethos of the Hampton Manor Wine List, because it is quite special.
Yeah, good question, really. You've always got to go back to the consumer, because it's you can put an interesting kind of concept out there to the general public or to the Hampton Manor customer base, but it's got to be relevant and it's got to be understandable. And the wonderful world of wine can be really, really complicated. So it's a matter of kind of simplifying it, really, and really understanding consumer psychology. As you've got a couple or a group coming in and they're sitting down to have a meal, and the wine list comes out. What we didn't really want was that sort of ceremonial kind of difficult situation whereby the winemaking decision is it can be sort of full of so much kind of ego and I think a lot of kind of negative feelings as well,
Yeah.
really, because it's sometimes it's quite a big decision. The pressure's kind of on. So what we try to sort of do is understand, like, where these consumers are coming from, and more often than not, one or two different sorts. So you have a kind of consumer that just doesn't want to be challenged, just wants to have a bottle or a glass of something that's very familiar. And it might be one of the 7 familiar grape varieties like Merlot, Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc, Shiraz. So what we wanted to do is cater for that kind of consumer. Rioja, Côte de Rhône, all the recognisable
Everything you'd expect to find is there.
Yeah, completely. But wines that we think represent, to the best of our knowledge, if you want to grab a Malbec from Argentina, from Mendoza, this is one that really, we think, truly represents, the best of the region and the best grape. But then also you have consumers that want to try something new, that want to be led off the beaten track, want to have a little bit more of an education, during the experience, and that's when we can really kind of start, tweaking things up. And taking them on a more of an adventurous kind of journey through a wine pairing, 7 wines. You can get to try some wines that I can guarantee you never would have heard of before.
Yeah.
You wouldn't recognise the grape variety. You probably never try wines like that from that region. And also, what natural wine also does as well, I kind of like a natural wine. The difference between natural wine to conventional wine is sort of analog to digital. Conventional wine's quite sort of digitized, is sort of put into a bit of a box and into a particular kind of style. And natural wine, you tend to kind of find all these slightly more, you have more breadth of flavour and these slightly more kind of crackly kind of characteristics kind of around the edge. And you do get some slightly more kind of savoury, kind of wild flavours, which are quite different for most consumers. So I guess more the minimum intervention natural wines we'd put into the adventurous side of the wine list.
So if I get this right, you've got your menu, you've got, and actually you've got a choice of whether you want to walk on the wild side or you want something low risk and conventional.
Completely, yeah.
And that is pretty much the ethos of the Hampton Manor wine list, isn't it?
And whilst building it as well, it wasn't me dictating. It was very much a joint selecting, sort of journey really for all of us. Really, like James and Fiona had input on the list, as well as the rest of the team. So everybody sort of got a favourite or a few different favourites on that list as well. So it wasn't something that we kind of came up with overnight. It was a good sort of 2.5 years sort of work in progress.
Yeah.
But you can apply that philosophy really to creating any kind of experience for guests. Whether that be with coffee. That's kind of where we got the idea from. One of the guys that used to work at the Manor, called Gary, that's what he used to do with most of his customers. Come up, what sort of coffee would you like today? Would you like something comforting or something a bit more adventurous? So the idea really kind of came from there.
So now we enjoyed some fantastic wines over the course of this dinner. I mean, every wine was great. Each wine had its fans. There were no landslide courses where everyone went for one particular wine. But one of the ones that I really enjoyed was the BIG. It was called Big.
Yeah.
By Peter Vassler.
Yeah.
Now, I was completely surprised that then at the end of the evening, you actually gave me a magnum of it to share with Jason and Craig. Now, I've been very disciplined and it's still sitting on the side. I meant to bring a bottle and put it here. I am drinking wine at the moment, by the way. And somebody's bound to ask that in a moment.
It's a natural wine as well.
I am drinking a natural wine. Cheers, William. I'm drinking a natural wine. It is a Transylvanian Riesling, Natchbill, and it's going down very well. Nice, fresh acidity that you expect from Riesling, but a bit of fruit going on in there as well. Sam, have you got a glass of wine on the go?
No. Tuesday, Tony.
It's Tuesday. Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, I'll have an extra glass for you. So now I've got the bottle of Big, just next door. Now, Peter Vassler is an interesting character. Talk to me about this wine and what makes it so special. I mean, the brand is it's Blank Bottle, isn't it? It's an incredible bottle art. And he famously says, "Judge a book not by its cover," even though he's got great labels on the bottle. But talk to me about this. This is a Cabernet Sauvignon, isn't it? The Big. What's so special about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what you tend to find with winemakers of that kind of ilk. You know, they're real kind of genuine characters. You know, their story is something very, very authentic. You know, a lot of these kind of big companies, they kind of fabricate. They've got so big now, and the production's so large, they kind of hark back to the old days. You know, sort of 50, 100 years ago, when everything was quite sort of small and kind of back to basics. And Peter's a real kind of storyteller. The basis of his, or the basic kind of story behind Blank Bottle is that he started off making one wine. I think it was a Shiraz, I don't know how many years ago. And he was just sort of testing things out. And he made this wine, his first wine, and it didn't have a label on it. And this lady came into the wine cellar, went to the cellar door asking for a few bottles of wine. She said, look, I'll have anything but Shiraz. So Peter was kind of, right, okay, well, I'm just going to give it a bit of a go. So he kind of boxed up this whole kind of case of Shiraz for this lady and sort of kept his fingers crossed. And away she went. And she came back a few weeks later raving about this wine. And it kind of made Peter... Now, I might not have this story 100% correct, because it might be a Cabernet Sauvignon, I can't quite remember. But
I've got a feeling it was a Shiraz. She said, don't give me a Shiraz. He gave her a Shiraz and she loved it.
It probably was a Shiraz. Came back raving. And this is generally kind of what happens with most consumers, is you have a formed kind of opinion of what you like and what you don't like, which is very right. But we're very, very kind of influenced by grape variety and, you know, other kind of influences. So, you know, never kind of judge a book by its cover, and never judge a bottle of wine by its grape as well. So that's where Peter's got this idea for this wine. And he works with, he's sort of rated by a lot of wine critics as one of the best winemakers in all of South Africa. And he's very adept at working with lots of different grape growers, lots of different grape varieties from various different plots of land all over the Cape, and he just makes some absolutely wonderful, stellar, delicious wines, and each wine has got its own kind of little story behind it.
And they kind of develop over the years as well, don't they? The style is ever changing, because I read that he yields 55 tons of grapes from 47 different plots.
That's right.
Which is absolutely bonkers, isn't it? You know, no one else is really doing that.
Yeah, and it means you get a broad palette, you know, as a winemaker. If you're, you know, it's having lots of different colours, I guess, really. And the more kind of colours you have, the more of an interesting product that you can pull together. And you know, he will kind of go to the extremes. He's got two wines that he releases on a fairly kind of regular basis. One which is been made that appeals to his conscious brain, and another white wine that appeals to his subconscious brain. One's called the orbital frontal cortex, which is also listed at Hampton Manor, and another one called the limbit as well. And he teamed up with, I think it was one of the universities in Cape Town to sort of do like a sort of psychological experiment. The idea kind of first came where he was on an airplane, I think, from Johannesburg to Cape Town, or vice versa, sat next to a guy that was hooked up to a laptop, but all of these kind of electrodes like dotted all over his head. So he got talking to him to try and figure out what was going on, and soon kind of realised that this guy was, you know, really kind of into you know, how your brain kind of interacts with, you know, with the environment. So Peter, you know, he's a kind of, you know, a curious kind of inquisitive guy, said, look, you know, give us a shout if you fancy doing anything with wine. So that's what they did, is they hooked Peter up to lots of electrodes, measured his brain waves, and essentially kind of created, it had lots of different wines, or cuvées as they're kind of called, lined up. And they tracked which wines triggered his conscious, and which wines triggered his subconscious, and they kind of fractionally kind of blended them at the end. So essentially kind of formed two different wines with for his conscious and for his subconscious. I mean, it's fascinating, really. It's kind of really taking the idea of winemaking, you know, really to the next level. And it's fascinating. Yeah, he's a lovely guy as well. I've met him a few times.
It's interesting you say that, because we were talking about so many different factors. You mentioned the soil earlier. you know, Peter Vasler making wine from hundreds of meters altitude, it's quite low altitude wines, and then blending those together. We were talking earlier about when you're drinking wine, it was something you mentioned actually about the air pressure in the room having an impact.
It's this little conversation we had before, before we switched on.
And then I went, what? 2 minutes to go before we're due to start, and I had to cut you off actually. But I was enthralled listening to you. But there's also lots of other things where, you know, there was the UCB in Birmingham, University of Cakes and Biscuits, as it's unofficially known, the catering college. They've done some amazing stuff where they do experiments where you're tasting things in different coloured rooms or with different music playing, and the impact that has.
There's it's a real area of interest of mine, and has been for quite a long time. There's a professor called Charles Spence, and he has been working with one of the colleges at Oxford University, garnering data for the last sort of couple of decades or so. And he works with, you know, some pretty big blue chip companies to help develop brands and develop that kind of customer experience, whether it's like the crackle of the, you know, of the crisp wrapper. The more crackly it is, the fresher the crisp kind of tastes. And you know, the more red you have on your wine label, the warmer the more kind of fruity the wine's going to taste. And it's, you know, it's something that Charles has been doing for, you know, for quite a long time. And he also worked with Heston Blumenthal as well on several of his dishes.
Right up his alley,
completely.
Now, Sam, last week chatting to Richard Banfield, we were talking about sustainability, and funnily enough, on the same day this paper bottle had been launched. We were talking about wine in cans. Richard mentioned wine on tap, which he felt was a real growth area. That's something you actually supply through to Hampton Manor, isn't it? They serve wine on tap.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it just works on every level, and it's the future, I think, for, you know, accessible, good quality wine by the glass. Doesn't work for every setup, but if you know, if you're an establishment, a restaurant or a wine bar or a pub or whatever, that it wants to try and have better quality wines by the glass, wine on tap is, you know, it's a great way forward to, you know, to achieve that. Wine on tap, it's a slightly kind of misunderstood concept really, because you can get wine on tap in Wetherspoons. What you'll find in Wetherspoons is they have this big sort of plastic kind of bag behind the facade, and the, you know, the tap kind of comes out. The technology behind wine on tap or wine from keg is a very, very different system. So we're working with Rupert and some of the guys at Enchanted Wine, who bring some of these wines from keg into the UK, and you know, they've got some great following with a lot of very, very good restaurants now, you know, 1-star, 2-star restaurants all around the UK. The strategy is being kind of working with some of the best guys at the top, so that the middle tier kind of look up to see, you know, a lot of these operators are really kind of championing this, you know, this sort of wine. There's cost savings, and also, you know, you generally kind of save just over about 20% by shipping in keg. Massive carbon footprint, which is reduced as well, around about 80%, which is huge. And they're shipped in these what are called kind of key kegs, which is like a Scandinavian kind of creation. And a lot of the artisan brewers, craft brewers in the UK, use key kegs as a way to get their, you know, really good quality handmade product from the brewery to the consumer. And it's essentially one of the reasons why brewers and good quality winemakers are using key kegs now, is because it's what's called a very reductive environment. So it means that there's literally no air contact. And it means that one of the most sensitive parts of the winemaking process is putting wine into a bottle. It's quite an aggressive process. You're going from a whacking great big tank, you know, several thousand litres, into a small little bottle. And it's very kind of disruptive, and particularly if you've got a wine which is made in a more sensitive kind of natural way. If you're putting it into a slightly larger vessel, and you're sending this slightly bigger vessel across the sea, across the ocean as well, it suffers less from sort of bottle shock. So it means you actually get a much better quality product, straight from keg, as soon as it, lands off the ship. And also they don't need to use anywhere near as many preservatives either. So a lot of the winemakers now are starting to use less and less preservatives by putting them into keg, because they realise that, they just don't need to have, loads of sulfur dioxide on top, which is, another kind of win-win. So there's a cost saving. They taste as fresh as anything. Some of these wines are incredible. 9 times out of 10, you try that wine from keg against the same wine from bottle, and 9 times out of 10, it tastes better from keg.
I don't know the science behind it, but I know, one of my old sommeliers, Francois, who we had on here the other week, he always used to, maybe it was just an upsales tool, but he always used to say wine tastes better the larger format that you can use.
Yeah, and that probably plays into the theory around that as well. These wines are not necessarily kind of made to age. A lot of winemakers say, and a lot of champagne houses generally kind of age their wines in larger format, disgorge them and put them into a smaller sort of 75 cl bottle, because they do age better in a bigger format. But the great thing about Key Keg is really the technology. That wine doesn't see any air contact at all until it actually comes out into the glass. So it tastes really fresh. If you've ever tried wine from a tank in a vineyard, with the winemakers, it's as close to that experience that you're really going to get. And that's why, I find it quite a exciting prospect, really.
Brilliant.
And every time I go back to try these wines, like from keg, I'm doing like a little kind of checkup or a taster at Hampton Manor or some of the other customers that we work with, I'm always bowled over every time I go and taste them. I'm like, wow, these wines are really, really.
Dan, I'm just around the corner, so if you ever need any help, just let me know.
Of course, you could be
a cab over.
You could be chief taste tester.
Chief taster, I'm up for that. Yeah. Now, so I love the Big. I'm looking forward to opening that very soon.
Good.
I also love the Austrian Gruner that we got with our Peels on Wheels meal for my lockdown birthday dinner a few weeks ago. Another natural wine. And this wine that I've got here, Natchbill, a natural wine. I didn't buy it because it was natural. I bought it because I tasted it at a tasting event and I loved it.
Yeah.
I guess if we shouldn't be able to tell if it's a natural wine or not, should we? We should just think that it's great wine.
Yeah, to a degree. Is that a question or is that?
You tell me. Should we be able to tell, and how should we be able to tell? And actually, the most important thing is it tastes great, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And as I mentioned right at the start, we're interested in wines that are authentic, that really, really do taste of the grape, of the vineyard, of the region, and of that moment in time and of the vintage as well. So if a wine tastes different from one year to the next, that to me that's a good thing. You can, as a winemaker, use so many different additives. And you can subtract various different components from the wine as well. You can subtract some of the stuff that's kind of gone wrong. But most wine that's made on big scale with lower quality fruit, you have to do so much of this kind of tweaking. So I think generally you can't get away with there are some natural wines on the market which aren't great, and there are some winemakers trying really, really hard to make natural wine that's good, but it's a real challenge. And there are so many new kind of natural winemakers coming on.
It's quite cool, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's quite cool, isn't it? So I imagine there's a number of people jumping on the back.
Yeah, it is quite a kind of cool, trendy thing to do, but it's very, very difficult. What we're tending to find is that we prefer a lot of the natural, minimal intervention, organic, biodynamic winemakers that have been doing it for a while, because you need to understand your environment. You need to understand, what nature chucks at you on a yearly, monthly, weekly, kind of daily basis, to inform you to make these kind of sensitive decisions. And if you're a new winemaker to a new wine region, and it's you kind of doing it for the first time, it's really, really difficult. It does take a long time. But I mean, one thing to kind of mention is that one of the most expensive, probably the most expensive wine that comes onto the market year upon year upon year is a wine by a Burgundy estate called Domaine Romanée-Conti, or DRC.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're natural. You know, for all intents and purposes, they follow what's called a biodynamic philosophy. All of their grape production is organic. They use very, very little of anything else in their wine apart from grapes. And they sell for thousands of pounds per bottle and release. Now, these guys have been doing it for a long, long time. And it's all about the pursuit of quality. And, you know, a lot of the big Bordeaux estates that release their wines for, you know, thousands of pounds, you know, every year en primeur before it's been put in barrel. You know, a lot of them are starting to experiment with organic viticulture and, you know, some parts of the biodynamic philosophy. So, you know, again, and I've been witness to, you know, seeing how a wine region has kind of evolved over the last 10 to 15 years or so. And Alsace on the border between France and Germany is just a great case in point. You know, they've got a burgeoning, you know, most of the production in Alsace is relatively small production, good quality, and most of it is kind of handmade. And a lot of the old school winemakers, you know, they've been making wine for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, do stuff organically.
Absolutely,
you know,
yeah. It's huge in Alsace, yeah.
Absolutely massive. And you ask any winemaker worth their salt, you know, what's the future? And they always say the future, you know, for quality is, you know, it's got to be promoting soil health, and doing, you know, things is less kind of invasive in the vineyard as possible. You get, you know, a true good quality product. But it's that kind of tension really between understanding as a natural winemaker what to do and what not to do, so you really don't get in the way of the true essence of the wine. So you know, you're expressing that, you know, that products in that place in time.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm interested in.
So now I'm going to give a bit of a shout. Well, first of all, Mrs. Elvin's brought in the bottle of Big, the BIG, and it is big. So looking forward to opening that soon. That might get open this weekend coming, actually. Now we're allowed to meet up with people in the garden and all the rest of it.
Right.
I've got a couple more questions coming through. So we've been asked, what is the difference between natural, biodynamic and organic? We're going to park that there. I'm going to answer that literally in about 2 minutes.
Yeah. Sure.
I've got Conrad asking, when is your project opening? I'm going to come back to that as well. Thanks, Conrad. Thanks for joining us. Thanks also to Mark, Sanjita, Anthony, Andrea, Chris, Caroline, Paul, Pat, Luke, Theo, Prem, Chris. Can't shout out everybody.
Right.
And also on the Zoom, we've got Dominic, William we mentioned earlier, Paul and Sheila, Marie. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us, for giving up your time to join us this evening. Now, what we're going to do now, this is the 101 on natural wine. So, Sam, I'm going to throw a number of natural wine, organic, biodynamic, minimal intervention terms at you, and you're gonna answer these. I'm going to publish this as a separate clip. We like to do a bit of education and a bit of chat and fun. So, are you ready for your jargon busting session, Sam?
Let's go. Yeah, ready.
Okay, natural wine.
Natural wine. Wine made without pesticides, chemicals or any other additives, but you're allowed a little bit of SO2, sulfur dioxide, if you like.
Perfect, thank you. Organic wine.
Wine made without any chemicals in the vineyard.
Great. Biodynamic wine.
I like to call it uber organics. It's a philosophy, an old farming technique based on an integral ecosystem promoting soil health.
Okay, and we're even to some levels picking grapes by the cycle of the moon, I believe.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, not always, depending on where you are in the world. But it's all, I mean, if you go back to the way that we used to do farming, even like 150 years ago, you did things by the ebb and the flow of the seasons, and also by the ebb and the flow of the moon, and more often than not, actually, by the astrological calendar. Not scientifically proven, but what is scientifically proven is the way that plants and vines as well grow, depending on gravity and the pull of the moon. You know, it has a direct effect on how biology kind of works.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my wife. My wife works in A&E, and on a full moon, you get some proper kind of loopy people.
Oh.
You get more people into A&E on a full moon. So
I'm sure that's
us
why Forest launched Super Saturday, the reopening of the bars on a full moon on a Saturday night. Absolutely genius. Now, we're kind of drifting away from this quick fire now. Wild or native yeast?
It's everywhere. That's my answer to that one. So wild and native yeast, they're exactly the same. It's yeast that's everywhere. On your grapes, in your cup of tea, everywhere. It surrounds you. Yeast and microbes are everywhere.
Is that not the force?
You leave a bit of fruit out, whatever, generally if there's enough warmth, it will start to ferment if there's starch and sugar in it. And that will only ferment due to the natural wild native yeast that you've got in the environment around you.
As opposed to, if I'm buying a supermarket wine, they're using a formula engineered yeast. Is that
cultured
correct?
Yeast. Yeah, cultured yeast will more often than not give you specific flavours. So that cheap bottle of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc that you'll find in Tesco's, they would have used one of 4 particular kinds of yeast to tweak up that kind of elderflower, gooseberry kind of flavour that you find in the bottle.
Right. Okay. Pet nat.
Pet nat is what you might call method ancestral, which is basically kind of means you make the wine, you don't quite finish the fermentation, you wang it in a bottle, and it finishes off its fermentation inside the bottle. So the 2 byproducts of fermentation is CO2 and alcohol. The CO2 can't go anywhere. You put a cap on the top, so it means that you integrate bubbles into the liquid. And it's a little bit like bottle conditioned beer, really. It's similar kind of process.
Orange or amber wine?
Orange or amber, they are kind of one and the same to a certain degree, depending on where you are in the world. So if you go to Georgia, they will call orange wine amber wine. So they're very, very similar. And essentially, orange wine or amber wine is kind of like it's white wine kind of masquerading as red wine. So it smells a bit like white wine and might taste a little bit like red wine. What you're doing in simple terms as a winemaker is you're using white grapes and you're employing a red winemaking technique. So you're macerating the white skins in the liquid, so you end up with something which is a little bit kind of tannic that feels a bit more like red in your mouth, but you're still using white grapes.
Now, I think Dominic has somewhere managed to spy on my sheet here, because the next one is 0-0, and he's just
0-0
chat on Zoom. Yeah, 0-0.
0-0 is literally nothing added, nothing taken away, which is a bit of a philosophy for natural wine in its entirety. It's very difficult to do, very, very difficult. I think the challenge with 0-0 is that there's no preservatives, and wine kind of needs a bit of a preservative to get it from A to B. And it's one of the challenges with natural wine, really, is that you try natural wine in the vineyard with the winemaker, it tastes great. You send it several thousand miles across the sea to the UK, and because it hasn't had any preservative put on it, it tastes a bit knackered. Okay. So it can be done, but only by the best winemakers, I think.
Sure. Unfiltered wine.
Unfiltered, I'm a big fan. We've got very used to filtered wines over the last sort of 50, 60 years or so. So these are the wines that appear, what you kind of call WSET. And if you're doing your wine exams, one of the first questions you get asked is it clear and bright? If it's lovely and clear and bright, it's a conventional wine. If it's cloudy, then it's not good and it's not for drinking, which I think is a load of bollocks, to be honest. Generally, if you've got good quality wine, all the bits in it give more flavour. So, if you've got good quality juice and really good wine, if you filter, you lose loads of the lovely kind of components of the wine. So it's big particles basically that come from the skin and the pip and all the rest of it. That,
okay.
Them,
unfined wine.
Unfined, again, it's a little bit like filtering. What you're doing is stripping out some of the smaller particles. So you might use particular products, whether that might be egg white or isinglass or fish guts or albumin. There's loads of different kind of products that you can use. So vegan people out there, that's what you need to look out for with if you're trying to find a vegan wine, you need to make sure that they haven't used any fining agents.
Amphora wine.
it's just an old vessel made out of clay, terracotta. It's how the Romans used to do it and the Greeks used to do it. And if you go to Georgia, for instance, there's a lot of amazing wine coming from Georgia at the moment into the UK, and various different wine consuming countries around the world. This is kind of, if you want to get an idea of ancient wine, try some Georgian wine. They do amber wine, they do orange wine, and all of it's made in what's called quiveries, which are these big amphora terracotta pots that are buried in the ground, keeps like a uniform temperature. A lot of the grape varieties that you use have been around for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, Georgia is the place, that is the birth of wine. Archaeological kind of records date back about sort of 8,500 years. So
and there's actually a great one to try in Marks and Spencer's for about 10 quid as well.
Yeah, I've heard the M&S.
Of course, we're going to send everyone to Wine Freedom once to Digbeth once it's open. Now,
lots of amphora orange wine.
Oxidative wine.
Yeah, it's introducing oxygen to the winemaking process and to the aging process. So I might have mentioned right back when we were talking about wine in keg, that's what's called reductive, so no air contact at all. And oxidative is the other one where you're introducing oxygen, and sometimes it makes for a more kind of stable wine. But you do get different kinds of flavours from oxidative wine.
And finally, carbonic maceration.
You chuck a load of carbon dioxide during the winemaking process, which maybe if you have a Beaujolais or a very kind of light, delicate red wine, sometimes they're made using CO2. What that does is that means under CO2, the grapes will start to ferment under their own steam, which means that you're not pushing the grapes or squashing them or squeezing them, which means that you get a lot of this kind of clear, free run kind of juice that's only slightly kind of pink or red from the red skins. They're delicious wines, but they can sometimes have that slightly kind of typical kind of bubblegummy kind of flavour that you get from Beaujolais.
Yeah, Beaujolais Nouveau.
Yeah, and it can be great. It's pretty fantastic. Bang the bottle in an ice bucket or in the freezer or on the fridge for 20 minutes or so. Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So thank you so much for that. For demystifying the world of minimal intervention wine. Now, William's posted Enrama Sherry ?
Enrama Sherry, yeah.
I think that came up around the point of unfiltered, unfined, maybe. So is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, not for a long time actually. My sherry drinking and appreciation days were probably about sort of 5 to 10 years ago. But we're kind of talking about like unfined, unfiltered, and also oxidative. The most sort of oxidative ones you can get are sherry, and
great example.
Kind of style wines. And Enrama, Tony, can you remember what Enrama means?
No.
I think it might be from one particular barrel, I think. It might be some sort of kind of Oloroso or kind of Fino style.
Straight from the barrel. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. And they tend to be absolutely delicious, and you might have to pay a few quid more for an Enrama.
Yeah. And I'm told that is Fino or Manzanilla. Now, so thank you for that. Are there any particular countries or regions? You mentioned Georgia just now, but are there any other countries that are really firmly behind this kind of natural wine movement?
Yeah, certainly. You have the Loire in particular, so a region in mid sort of northern France that have they're going through the process of certifying their own certificate for natural wine. It's the only region in the whole of the world that's actually doing this. And natural wine, it doesn't really have a definition. And this is one of the sort of divisive points about natural wine, is that it could mean one thing or another. There's no industry definition, and I think that's why a lot of people get very, very confused about it. But I can't remember the accreditation that's been given, but it's several winemakers from the Loire that have got together and managed to get a sort of label and accreditation for it. Okay. So the Loire, certainly, there's a lot of winemakers. There's a pivotal winemaker called Nicolas Joly has been making wine since after the Second World War. makes some, you know, quite incredible stuff. And he's been promoting biodynamics and natural wine for, you know, for decades and decades.
Yeah.
South of France as well. I'm a massive fan of the Roussillon. I visited a couple of times. You go into the foothills of the Pyrenees. It's an idyllic spot, you know, and you can grow pretty much anything around there. You know, from tomatoes to courgettes to onions and grapes. It's a very kind of clean spot. You've kind of got the altitude with the Pyrenees, and you've got this lovely sort of cooling, kind of warm influence from the mountains and from the sea. You know, it's one of my favourite spots for, you know, good quality natural wine. And also, I mean, you're seeing them pop up all over the place. You know, some really interesting stuff coming from Australia in particular as well. I've got a bit of a soft spot for a region called Swartland in South Africa, which is just up around the Cape from Cape Town. It's used to be one of the sort of big engine rooms for low quality wine production if you go back several decades or so. And you've got a group of winemakers that have been kind of coined the Swartland Revolution. There's about sort of nine or 10 of them if you go back sort of 15 odd years or so. We represent quite a few of them actually on our wine list, and it's all about in the pursuit of quality. You know, going back to producing fruit organically, minimal intervention, looking at your vines and your environment, just trying to produce the best quality fruit. And during the winemaking, you know, not trying to get in the way of stuff too much, you know, to try and, you know, what we're going to be doing at the new venue. I'm a big fan of Chenin Blanc as a grape, and just all the different sorts of Chenin Blanc that you can get from all these amazing natural winemakers in Swartland now is quite incredible. You know, if you if you come into a new space and dig with, I will bore you senseless about Chenin Blanc from Swartland. But the diversity is incredible. You know, it really is incredible. You can taste the vineyard from one place to another, same grape, and, you know, very kind of little winemaking going on, and you can taste the grape in the vineyard, and that's what
I've got a question for you. So one criticism I've heard of natural wine is that it often doesn't taste like that specific grape. It doesn't taste like it would traditionally taste. Is that fair, or is that absolute garbage?
Yeah, a bit of garbage really. Granted, you can get some poorly made natural wines that will be oxidized. You know, you've got microbially all over the place. You know, they've kickstarted another kind of fermentation in the bottle, and yeah, of course you're going to lose the flavour of the fruit. But kind of going back to what we were saying before, really well made, good quality natural wine, you can't get an experience closer to the grape variety, because most conventionally made wines, you know, they would have used cultured yeast, and that cultured yeast will either amplify the flavour of the grape, or, you know, put in extra kind of flavours because that wine is lacking something. So, you know, again, natural winemaking is about, you know, not getting in the way of what letting
the grape sing.
Yeah, completely.
Now, what percentage of the market would you say is occupied by natural wine at the moment? And I guess as a movement or a phenomenon, it's relatively new, which is a paradox in as far as obviously the methods are so old, aren't they? They're the traditional methods, really.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of segment it up, really. I mean, like organic wine accounts for just under 2% of the market in the UK, but it's growing rapidly at 25%, over 25% year upon year.
Okay.
But the thing about organic wine, and this is quite important to kind of establish, is that, you know, you could have organically grown grapes, but then you get them in the winery, and you can still chuck a load of stuff at the wine to turn it and form it into something else. And natural wine accounts for like 0. something or other of the, you know, of the wine industry. So it's a very, very small percentage, and it, as it should be to a certain degree, because, you know, you can't produce natural wine really on a big scale. There just isn't really economies of scale with natural wine. It's very, very difficult to do. And there, you know, there are different kind of techniques and philosophies involved with the kind of umbrella thing of natural wine. You have lutte raisonnée, you have more kind of sustainably kind of produced wines. And we're kind of more interested in, you know, wines that are produced more naturally, you know, that are sensitively produced. And, you know, it accounts for a relatively small percentage of the wines in the market. And rightly so.
Now, you mentioned that obviously transporting a natural wine, it might taste great, at the winery, you transport it thousands, hundreds of miles, and it spoils. What impacts is there on the aging potential of a natural wine? Will it age just as well? I guess in the very famous winery earlier that's top of the top, and obviously it has amazing aging potential.
Yeah, huge. And again, a lot of the top estates in Bordeaux are doing exactly the same thing. It's really just understanding what the product is and, how it evolves, because, aging wine is about the evolution of the natural product that you have inside the bottle. So again, it's kind of going back to, winemakers that have been doing it for a while, that understand their product. I am a fan of using sulfur dioxide in wine in what you call judicious amounts, because sulfur dioxide it's not a naturally occurring component, but it's sulfur and dioxide bound together, and those two kind of chemical compounds actually dissipate into the environment relatively easily. So, and it's a relatively sort of naturally occurring compound. So SO2, or sulfur dioxide, is ubiquitously kind of used products in the winemaking process. So I would always kind of say natural wine that uses judicious amounts of sulfur dioxide is great. It'll get a wine from A to B, and it'll also allow that aging process to happen kind of naturally inside the bottle. It's a bit of a difficult one, really. I mean, there is some, going back to that question, oxidative, some wines that are produced oxidatively and naturally, and quite often kind of bulletproof. You can keep them for like years and years and years, and they'll gradually change and evolve because they've been introduced to oxygen during the winemaking process, and that's how they're meant to be. So yeah, it kind of depends on the wine, really.
Sam, we're going to move very quickly on to your 20 questions in 2 minutes, but Dominic's posed a question around any comments on any of the natural wine from England. Westwell, Tillingham. Now, I know you are quite a champion for British wines as well. Anchor Hill, I know you're a big fan of, another natural wine producer. Anything to say on British wine and what we're doing with that natural process?
Yeah, again, it's all about pursuit of quality. I think that there's maybe a small percent that kind of jumping on the, kind of new wave, kind of, funky kind of bandwagon. But again, it's you want to show off your spot, your vineyards, and really kind of try and sort of give that sense of place to a consumer. I really kind of truly do believe that the minimal intervention approach really does give you that the ability to do that. So yeah, I mean, what Ben's doing at Tillingham, I think so. He's still kind of in that experimental kind of mode. His marketing is fantastic, and I do believe that in several years' time he's going to be making some amazing stuff. And Anchor Hill, based over in Monmouth, I've been a fan of for quite a few years or so. And the philosophy there is one of the strongest winemaking sort of investment and philosophies I think in the whole of the UK. It's pretty incredible, really. And again, it's all about investing in the soil. And promoting soil health, because they're all about. I mean, they didn't plant any vines for a good sort of 4 to 5 years or so before. They wanted to kind of get the nutrients and the microbial activity going in the soil before they even started planting their vines. A huge amount of time and investment gone into just the soil, and the wines are pretty incredible. One of the best, or probably the best, Pinot Noirs I think I've ever tried is their single varietal Pinot Noir. It gives a real sense of place, and it can taste and smell very different depending on the time you try it. And I think it's the 2014, which is the one we've been drinking recently, and it can change kind of differently. But every time I kind of go back to it, it's completely unique. You won't get that kind of Pinot Noir from anywhere. And I know David that made that wine. It's one of those ones that he sort of sense checked against some of the great winemakers that he's worked with over the years all around the world, and it's one of the wines that they've all kind of gone, yeah, that's pretty kind of incredible stuff.
Fantastic. Well, it is that time of the night, Sam. It is your 20 questions in 2 minutes. So
Great.
brace yourself. I want quick, punchy answers. No dithering, otherwise you get the hooter when we play the video back. So
right.
here you go. Here's your 20 questions in 2 minutes.
All right.
Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc?
At the moment, Sauvignon.
Fine dining or steak and chips?
At the moment, fine dining.
Oaked or unoaked?
Unoaked, definitely.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Bordeaux or Burgundy?
Burgundy.
Cremant or Cava?
Cremant.
Champagne or English sparkling?
English sparkling, all the way.
Petnat or Prosecco?
Pet Nat, definitely.
Ridgeview or Night Timber?
Nice Timber.
Night in or night out?
Night out.
Syrah or Shiraz?
I don't have nights in recently. Sorry, what was the last one?
Syrah or Shiraz?
Syrah.
Chianti or Rioja?
Chianti.
Aldi or Lidl?
Aldi.
Malbec.
Richard, he's on before, probably won't be happy with that.
Malbec or Cabernet Sauvignon?
God, blimey. Cabernet.
Oz Clarke or Joe Fattorini?
Oh, Fatters, all the way. He used to be my boss. I couldn't say otherwise.
New World or Old World?
Old World.
Left bank or right bank?
Right bank.
Stilton or Roquefort?
Roquefort.
Cheese before dessert or after dessert?
Definitely before dessert. Before you've even started.
Port or sherry?
Sherry.
Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio?
Same as Pinot Gris. Yeah, New World.
All right, Magic, thank you for that.
Yeah,
thanks for being a good sport.
Does everybody get the same questions? They're all
No.
different, yeah.
It's slight variation. I caused a diplomatic incident when I made Phil Innes choose between OPM and Meat Shack. And I'd love to put that in there for anyone local.
That's not nice. That's not nice.
I like going to both. So on the count, I didn't really want to be barred from either. I left that out since. So I've been pretty easy on you there, I think. Now, we talked about you curating the wine list at Hampton Manor. You look after some other great venues as well, don't you? Why don't you drop a few names?
Kind of hoping that they're going to start coming out of hibernation now. Some great ones. We've been really, really lucky. I mean, we started up 5 years ago. Really, sort of about 4.5 years ago, selling to the trade. Because the original idea, really, for Wine Freedom was, we'd start up as a direct-to-consumer brand, and we start up a wine club. But I soon kind of realised that we had quite a few connections in the industry, restaurateurs and chefs, and a lot of them kind of came out of the woodwork and said, "Look, we can see what you're doing. We'd love to, love to get involved." So we've had a lot of love, in the process, and a lot of support. And it's great to be working with some amazing chefs and some great restaurateurs. And it makes meeting up with some of them, a bit of a joy. You get to try a few dishes along the way and try some great wine, and it's great. We're very, very lucky.
That is exactly why I host wine dinners still, to be fair. Now, so come on, drop a few names for us. Who are some of the other people that you supply wine to?
Well, we do a bit of work with Gareth at Nemedia, so Gareth Ward over at Anisea Hall, who, I mean, Gareth just creates some incredible food. They should be a 2-star restaurant. Why they haven't got their 2nd star, nobody knows. I think they've been waiting for the last kind of 3 years or so, really. They're based over near Mahuntcliffe, about as far west as you can go in Wales. Amazing spot, lovely people, and if you've got a few hundred quid to blow on an amazing experience, I'd say head west a good couple of hours or so and spend some great time with them over there. And the guys at Carter's, Holly and Brad and Alex and the rest of the team have been delightful, lovely, great supporters over the years. And I think, our sort of natural wine journey have sort of gone hand in hand, over the last sort of 3-4 years or so. Quite often I'll kind of go in and they'll be, try this, and I'll be like, can I try a bit of that? And it's been great. fantastic working with those guys. And of course, James and Fiona at Hampton Manor, you know, they've been massive supporters from the start. And you know, I'm kind of part of the furniture, I guess, there now. And loads, you know, Land Restaurant, they're opening up again tomorrow, I think. You know, Great Western Arcade. The guys at Thousand Trades, you know, they're doing wine on tap. A great advocate for, you know, for organic and natural wine on tap. You know, they've got a great range of wine over there, very accessible, and a lovely team. I can't kind of shout them all out.
No,
you know,
no, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Just give people a flavour of the kind of quality that you're working with. Now, I guess one of the best ways to get a real feel for natural wine, and you know, you represent the very best end of that market, is to come along to one of your wine fairs. It's not really conducive with the pandemic at the moment, but
no, it's a bit frustrating, really. Yeah.
But I hear things are racing along with the Digbeth project, so hopefully we're going to get to visit very soon. Conrad's desperate to know when. Can you give us the big reveal? When are you looking to open?
It's a moving beast. So, you know, it was going to be a bit of a whistles and bells installation and fit out. And now we've decided to sort of wind it back a little bit. We're going to phase it in over the next sort of 6 to 12 months or so. So we're going for what I call like a resourceful kind of lo-fi approach. But we're trying to sort of gear it up as an educational experience. So, you know, we'll have hundreds of wines to try. First and foremost, initially it's going to be a shop, because we can't do, you know, these kind of big scale wine tastings at the moment. It's going to be a very, very flexible space as well. So where we're putting the bar and the retail space for the first few months or so might change. We might end up kind of moving it around and putting it elsewhere. So it's going to be a nice, big, kind of flexible space. And Taylor, you know, who I've been working with for a good couple of years now, I mean, he just epitomizes, you know, the best of what you can think of, you know, with hospitality. His wine knowledge is great as well. He's probably a better taster than I am. You know, he kind of eats, sleeps, breathes, you know, wine and natural wine. So he's going to be the main guy kind of running the show. And we've got another, you know, great lady that's going to be, fingers crossed, joining us alongside myself and Taylor once we're up and running. And she's great, you know, her wine knowledge is fantastic. And again, she's great at hospitality and stuff. And the idea is that, you know, we want, you know, everybody that walks through the door to feel, you know, comfortable and welcome. You know, we want that exchange, really. We want to be able to kind of help and guide and you know, make the whole kind of wine experience, you know, fun, inclusive and accessible. So yeah, it's a bit of a job to kind of fill up the space, but it's all about wine, really, about wine and us and you, without all the kind of flashy kind of other stuff like, you know, going on in the background. I mean, saying flashy stuff, we probably will include a bit of technology as well. I'm a big fan of projectors and moving images and telling stories, you know, via like a sort of audio visual kind of means. So there'll be a little bit of sort of the wine freedom kind of audio visual thing involved as well.
No, brilliant.
But it's very much like a flexible space.
So I've got a question here. The question is from William. He's saying, for a newbie, where's a great place to try natural wine? Well, I'm guessing it's going to be from you very soon.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it's one thing we're lacking really on the website is, I mean, our website's very much it's winefreedom.co.uk if anyone wants to know. We need to kind of make the whole kind of newbie kind of, you know, introduction to natural wine a lot more of an accessible thing online, and it's certainly what we're going to be doing in store as well. So we'll kind of do the wine freedom experience. We've kind of got the nucleus of a great little wine tasting that only takes a few minutes or so, and it involves sort of palate profiling, so getting to know what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah.
And then also connecting with that, the philosophy around natural wine and why you should really be considering natural wine as your future drinking choice.
That's brilliant. Well, I can't wait to come down and have a glass of wine with you. I'm sure for any of the people tuning in this evening, I'm sorry I couldn't shout you all out. I'm sorry I couldn't ask every question. But Sam, you've done a great job in clearing some of the fog around mineral intervention wine and helping us understand it a bit better.
Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, we'll all be down to see you soon. It'd be great for you to take us through that tasting experience actually within it's Floodgate Street, is that right? Is that the
Floodgate Street, number 28. It looks like a garage at the moment because it has been a garage for for the last several decades or so. It's a lovely old building that was kind of constructed sort of during the Second World War to make components really for for all the different bits and bobs that needed to go into all the machines that we were using as a nation during the Second World War. So it's a probably kind of lovely historical building, lots of natural light. And go back to Conrad's question, we're hoping to open up the shutter. Anyway, we might not be a finished product in about sort of 4 to 6 weeks' time, fingers crossed.
That is brilliant news. So, William, in answer to your question, it is going to be down in Digbeth on Floodgate Street. Try those natural wines. Pop in and see Sam. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being a great guest this evening. Raise my glass to you and have a great week. Thank you to everyone for joining us.
Got a bottle. There we go.
Notice you've got some pouches there behind you as well. Crack one of those. Okay. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Cheers, Tony. Thank you.